Hello there. This is Alex. A little pre-episode house cleaning of a few things I wanted to go through before we get into the breakdown of how to classify cheeses. I just wanted to start by saying this last few weeks has been a little rough for recording and for releasing of the episodes. Being sick a handful of times, my wife and I got a new puppy, and we had an unfortunate death in the family. So the episode release schedule has been a little weird, but I think we should get back to at least once a week, either Thursdays or Fridays. They should be coming back out. I also wanted to say we have had a pretty good increase of viewers in the last few weeks. The first 3 months of doing this show, we had a pretty steady viewer listening rate. And the last few weeks, it's almost doubled. So I'm not entirely sure what's been going on there, but I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been listening. If you're in the US or around the world, I just want to say thanks for being here. You know, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out via email or Facebook, or like a comment, subscribe. I don't know what all the words you're supposed to say here. I'm still pretty new to the podcast world, but if you can, like, rate, subscribe, share, anything, because this has been really fun the last few months, and I've really enjoyed watching it spread throughout the world. And if we can keep going, I would love that. So before the episode started, I just wanted to pop in real quick and say thanks to everyone who's been listening. Thanks to all the new people who are listening, and I hope we can continue to grow this show. Big shout out to a couple people, Greg and Jay. You guys have been pretty supportive listeners from the beginning. Thanks, guys. Hello there, my name's Alex, and I sell cheese for a living. As a cheesemonger and certified cheese specialist, I have helped thousands of customers find their favorite cheese. Each episode, I'll share what I've learned from behind the counter as we dive into the vast and fascinating world of all things cheese. This week, we talk about the different ways we can categorize cheese. If you've ever stood in front of a cheese case and felt a little overwhelmed, you're not alone. Most of us grow up thinking about cheese in simple terms, by country, by milk, or by whatever our parents bought at the grocery store. But once you step into the world of cheesemongers, you realize that cheese is organized very differently. One of the most useful ways to understand cheese isn't geography or milk type, it's kind of time. It's time. How much moisture does a cheese start with? How much does it lose? And what happens to it as it ages? Today's episode is all about building that roadmap. We're not trying to memorize every cheese in the world. There are far too many, but we're going to learn how the system works. So every cheese you meet after this makes a little more sense. We're going to move in a natural progression, starting with the youngest, freshest cheeses and slowly working our way toward the hardest, longest aged styles. But before we dive into the cheeses themselves, I think it's worth asking, why even bother classifying them at all? Cheese is one of humanity's oldest foods, and while it's easy to enjoy on a plate or in a recipe, understanding it systematically changes how we experience it. The earliest attempts to classify cheeses date back hundreds of years. One of the first people to really try was the French naturalist Brillat-Savarin in the early 19th century, who emphasized that cheeses could be categorized based on texture, aging, and the characteristics of the milk used. Since then, cheesemongers, scientists, and organizations like the American Cheese Society have refined these ideas, creating systems that help us compare, study, and truly appreciate the diversity of cheeses. Classifying cheese is important because it gives us language to describe it, a framework for tasting, and a way to preserve and improve techniques. When you know the type of a cheese, you instantly have expectations about its texture, the flavor, any pairing potential, and how it might age. It's like having a map before exploring a vast, delicious landscape. And once you have that map, every choice at the cheese counter becomes more informed and exciting. As far as a cheesemonger's take on this, I have a couple different thoughts on how to organize a cheese case. So if you were to go to a store and there's a big cheese case, depending on where you're at and who's running that counter or that case, you may find a different layout. Some cheesemongers, cheese sellers decide that they want their case to flow regionally. I haven't seen that a ton, but I have seen it. I have seen some that go by animal breed. You're going to have a goat section, a sheep section, a cow section, and you might have it lumped by, and you might have them neighboring each other depending on shared cheeses. Like if there was a cheddar section, it might start with sheep's milk cheddars and goat's milk cheddars flowing into cow milk cheddars, so that the cheddars are connected but still flowing from animal to animal. The way I organize my cheese case is by type, by what we're about to describe. I have a fresh cheese section, and then that goes older and older and older as we go down the case. So it will cover fresh cheeses, then soft ripened and bloomy rind cheeses. If I have any soft, or if I have any washed rinds or semi-softs leading to the semi-firm, and then firm and hard at the end. Blue cheeses are kind of their own category all the way at the end, just to keep them by themselves. So at least for me, in my experience, a nice case layout is kind of the old adage of mild to wild, but for the most part, it's going to be the aging levels of the cheeses. Now let's get into what constitutes the types of cheeses. What makes a fresh cheese? If we begin at the beginning with fresh cheeses, they are unaged or only lightly aged with high moisture and very clean, direct flavors. There is no rind here and very little time between the milk and table. Fresh cheeses tend to taste like the milk they come from. They're going to be bright, lactic, often a little tangy. Think of ricotta, cottage cheese, queso fresco, fromage blanc, fresh mozzarella. What's fascinating is that versions of fresh cheese exist in almost every food culture on the planet. That's because this is the simplest and fastest way to turn milk into something nourishing and delicious. Fresh cheeses give us our baseline. Everything else we talk about today is essentially a response to time. What happens when we let that cheese rest, dry, and transform? Most cheeses in the fresh category can be made and eaten within the same day and are often intended to be eaten that way. If we were to allow time to step in ever so gently and adjust for some different cultures or bacteria added to the cheese making process, we can arrive at soft ripened cheeses, or often called bloomy rind cheeses. These cheeses develop a soft, edible white rind and ripen from the outside inward. What surprises many people is that these cheeses actually start firmer and become softer as they age. The rind does some real work here, breaking down the interior paste and creating that creamy, sometimes gooey texture that we associate with cheeses like brie, camembert, and triple cream styles. Flavor-wise, soft ripened cheeses often lean buttery and mushroomy, sometimes with vegetal or cabbage-like notes. The rind also isn't decoration, it's essential. And yes, you can eat it. Oftentimes, you are encouraged to eat it. But if the rind isn't for you, don't feel bad. Just carve off whatever you prefer not to eat and enjoy the rest. This is one of the categories where I have to remind people there is no shame in how you choose to eat your cheese. Eat it how you need to enjoy it. From there, we can take a sharp turn into the washed rind cheeses. These cheeses are regularly washed with brine, beer, wine, or spirits as they age, which encourages a completely different group of microbes to grow on the surface. Washed rind cheeses are famous for their aroma, and they're often the cheeses that intimidate people the most. What's important to know here is that they frequently smell much stronger than they taste. Under that exterior, the flavors are often deeply savory, meaty, and surprisingly gentle. Cheeses like Taleggio, Epoisse, a traditional Munster, and Limburger all live in this category. Interestingly, a washed rind cheese and a bloomy rind cheese can start as nearly the same wheel, but it's the care, how the rind is treated, that sends them down two very different paths. The washed rind cheeses were meant to be a meat substitute for monks during periods of religious fasting during the Middle Ages. If you were a monk in France or Belgium, for example, you may have had times of fasting that meat was not allowed, but cheese was still okay. And if you were an intelligent monk, you would find a way to recreate some of those meaty flavors in the cheese. And that comes from the washing process, like I said, brine, beer, wine. It promotes the growth of Brevibacterium linens, which is a bacteria that produces a distinct orange rind and gives that cheese that earthy, nutty, savory, meaty flavor. I'm not saying that a washed rind cheese is going to taste like steak, but if you are fasting and you're looking for something other than vegetables, this will do the trick. Next up, we're going to look at the semi-soft cheese category. As your cheese ages and the moisture continues to drop, that is this category. It feels very familiar to many people, even if they don't know the name for it. Semi-soft cheeses still retain enough moisture to feel supple, full, and elastic, but the cheese now has more structure. Many of the cheeses we love for melting live right here, which is why this category shows up constantly in everyday cooking and for sandwiches. Think of cheeses like Havarti, Fontina, and Young Gouda. These are comfort cheeses for many of us. They're approachable, versatile, pretty important. This category is for before the cheese gets firm. These are still soft and pliable. If you continue to age the cheese for a little longer, or if you're making something very specific, we end on the semi-firm cheeses. Time really starts to make itself known here. As the moisture level drops further, the textures will tighten and the flavors will deepen and concentrate. This category includes some of the most iconic cheeses in the world. You're looking at cheddar, Alpine-style cheeses like your Swiss cheeses, your Gruyères. Younger versions of Manchego would live here too. One important idea to understand is that aging length often matters just as much as the recipe. The same cheese can move from semi-soft to semi-firm simply by staying on the shelf longer. And cheddar is a perfect example of this. It isn't one cheese, it's a family of cheeses shaped by time, handling, and place. Now we reach the long game. Firm and hard cheeses are defined by low moisture, dense texture, and aging measured in months or years rather than weeks. Historically, many of these cheeses were designed for preservation and travel. Parmigiano Reggiano, Pecorino, and aged Manchego are all excellent examples of firm and hard cheeses. This is where we're going to encounter crumblier textures, concentrated savory flavors, and all those crunchy little tyrosine crystals that people either love instantly or hopefully learn to love over time. Those crystals aren't flaws. Those are some of the best parts of any aged cheese, and they're often signs of careful aging in the transformation process. Outside of the fresh, semi-soft, semi-firm, firm-hard, we can look at the blue cheese category, or kind of the rule breakers of the cheese world, because blue cheeses don't follow the same timeline as the other categories. They're grouped not by firmness, but by the intentional growth of internal mold. Blue cheeses can be soft, semi-firm, or hard. What unites them is the presence of blue mold running through the interior, encouraged by piercing the cheese during aging. Cheeses like Roquefort, Gorgonzola, Stilton, and many other American blue styles all fall into this category. Blue cheeses rewrite the usual rules of inside versus outside ripening, and they thrive on contrast. That's why they pair so beautifully with sweetness. Honey, fruit, and sugar help balance their sharp, savory intensity. As we wrap up this short journey of explaining different types of cheeses and their aging processes, let's take a moment to see the bigger picture. We started with fresh, unaged cheeses, simple, bright, and direct, tasting almost exactly like the milk that they came from. Then we moved through soft ripened cheeses that ripen from the outside in, wash-drying cheeses that challenge our noses but delight our palates, and semi-soft and semi-firm cheeses that balance moisture and structure. Finally, we explored firm and hard cheeses, developed for aging and preservation, and finished with blue cheeses that defy the normal rules of ripening entirely. Every cheese we discussed today represents a decision about time, moisture, and microbial life. And understanding these categories gives us the roadmap for tasting, pairing, and even cooking with cheese. But here's something I almost forgot to mention. Even within these types, there is infinite variation. The same style of cheese can taste completely different depending on the milk, the season, the farm, and the hands that crafted it. Classification is a guide, but the real magic happens in the unique story of each wheel. So the next time you approach a cheese case, don't be overwhelmed. Remember the roadmap that we talked about. If you're next to the cheddars, look around. You might be close to some manchegos or parmesans down the road. If you are next to some fresh mozzarella, keep going, you might find the Havarti. Pairing similar cheeses in cheese cases does help the consumer understand where they're at in the store. You just have to understand what store you're shopping and how they organize their cheese case. Now, this episode wasn't directly supposed to be about how a cheese case is organized when you're shopping, although I did mention that quite a few times. It's more of a intro to the different types of cheese and how they are categorized and ripened. In future episodes, I will break down each individual category and then some of the pro players in each of those categories. But for now, this is a nice intro to kind of get you used to some of the verbiage. All in all, just remember that every cheese has its own story. It's waiting to be tasted, savored, and appreciated, and I hope you can go find a new cheese to try sometime soon. Thank you for listening to this episode. My name is Alex, and this has been The Modern Monger.